When I bought the lakefront lot at the end of Willow Creek Road, I knew exactly what I was doing. It sat just outside the boundary line of the Oak Shores HOA, literally 1 foot beyond their jurisdiction. I double-checked the survey maps, county records, and even walked the property line with a tape measure like some obsessive lunatic. Why? Because I've dealt with HOA nonsense before, and I wasn't about to let some board of clipboard tyrants start telling me what color my dock should be. I'm Trent Sandell, 43, ex-contractor turned independent home designer, 1 divorce deep, no kids, and finally building my dream cabin by the water. The land was mine fair and square, no covenants, no restrictions, no dues. Just me, my tools, and the sound of loons at dusk. The trouble started the day I poured the concrete footings. I was leveling out some gravel when this beige SUV rolled up, kicking dust all over my gear. Out stepped Karen herself. Well, technically her name was Brenda Whitmore, but the haircut and the permanent scowl gave her away before she even opened her mouth. "You can't build there," she snapped, marching across the gravel like she owned the planet. I adjusted my hat and leaned on my shovel. "Sure I can. County approved the permits. You're standing outside the HOA line, lady." She sniffed like she smelled something bad. "Oak Shores regulations apply to all lakefront properties in this area. We have jurisdiction over the lake view and the shorefront aesthetic." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds made up." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "We'll be sending a cease and desist. You can't just throw up some shack and ruin the view for the rest of us." I didn't answer. I just pulled out my phone, opened the county zoning map, and tapped the highlighted area. That red line right there. "That's your boundary. I'm out here. You're in there. Now if you'll excuse me, my concrete's setting." She turned red as a lobster left in a microwave too long. Her lips thinned. "Then we'll see what our lawyers have to say." I gave her a little wave as she stormed off, tires squealing like she was driving a Mustang instead of a mid-range SUV with HOA bumper stickers. I figured that'd be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I got a letter certified mail. A thick packet from a law firm that apparently represented Oak Shores HOA. They claimed I was violating a viewscape integrity clause that applied to all contiguous shoreline lots. Total nonsense. I threw it on the workbench and kept building, but Brenda wasn't done, not even close. By the 2nd week of construction, I'd laid the subfloor and started framing the cabin walls. The skeletal structure stood proud against the tree line, and I'd just gotten the lumber for the roof trusses delivered when I noticed something odd. A brand new Notice of Violation sign staked at the edge of my driveway. It had the Oak Shores HOA's logo at the top, followed by a list of infractions: unauthorized construction, environmental disruption, and failure to submit architectural plans for review. I blinked at it. Then I laughed. That sign was planted on my land. I yanked it out and tossed it onto the stack of scrap wood. 10 minutes later, I was on the phone with the county's building compliance office. A guy named Dave answered. I'd dealt with him when I pulled my permits, and he remembered me. "Hey, Trent. What's going on?" "Got a fake violation notice from Oak Shores HOA. They posted it on my property." "You're outside their jurisdiction." "I know, thought you should too. They're impersonating a municipal authority." "That's not just inappropriate, that's illegal." "I'll file an incident report and notify the county attorney." I thanked him, hung up, and went back to work, but that wasn't their last move, not even close. 2 days later, I came back from a supply run to find a white pickup parked at the edge of my lot. A man in khakis and a neon vest was walking around with a clipboard, examining my retaining wall like he was with the Army Corps of Engineers. I stepped out of my truck and called over. "You with the county?" He turned, startled. No, HOA Compliance Division." "There is no such division." "Not here," he hesitated. "We're authorized to inspect shoreline modifications under the Oak Shores Environmental Charter." "You're trespassing," I said flatly. "Leave." He looked like he wanted to say more but thought better of it. He got in his truck and drove off without another word. I made a note of the license plate just in case. The next morning, I installed 2 trail cameras, one facing the road, the other covering the lakefront. If they wanted to play games, I'd make sure every move they made was recorded in high definition. That weekend, the real fireworks started. I was hauling lumber with my friend Cassidy. She's a retired firefighter who now runs a small sawmill operation nearby. She's tough, blunt, and allergic to nonsense. We were unloading beams when she tilted her chin toward the lakeside path. Got company. I turned. Brenda was back, this time with 2 men in polos following behind her like Secret Service agents, clipboards in hand. "You're trespassing again," I said, not even bothering to greet her. "We're conducting an official perimeter review," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. Cassidy barked a laugh. "What the hell is a perimeter review?" Brenda ignored her. "You've encroached on community access space. This path here is part of a shared-use easement." "No, it's not. That path's on my parcel. I've got the surveyor's report in my truck." One of her clipboard goons stepped forward. "You can't obstruct shoreline access. That's a Class C infraction under Oak Shores regulations." Cassidy took a step forward. "This ain't Oak Shores. This is private property. I'd suggest you turn around before someone calls the sheriff." Brenda's tone turned icy. "We'll be filing a formal injunction." "Go ahead," I said. "Just make sure you spell the address right. Wouldn't want you wasting more of your HOA dues on pointless lawsuits." They left without another word, but that night, someone cut the power cable to my temporary construction box. That crossed a line. I checked the footage from the trail cam facing the road. At 2:46 in the morning, a figure in dark clothing crept across the lot and squatted next to the generator. I couldn't see the face, but the gait and shape looked familiar, too broad to be Brenda, too lean to be one of the clipboard twins. I took the footage straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Langford reviewed the video with me, frowning as he paused the frame. "That's Larry Cummings. He's on the Oak Shores Maintenance Committee. I know that limp he messed up his knee in a snowmobile wreck last year, still walks like he's dragging a cinder block." "Can you charge him?" Langford nodded slowly. "That's felony vandalism, cutting a power line to a construction site. That's no prank." "I'll file the report and send it to the DA." The arrest happened 3 days later. Sheriff's deputies pulled up to Oak Shores Community Center during one of their so-called board strategy meetings and walked Larry out in cuffs. Apparently, he confessed immediately and claimed he was following board directives. Interesting choice of words. I filed a civil suit the same week, trespassing, property damage, and attempted interference with lawful construction. My lawyer, Priya, a former city zoning attorney who now runs her own practice, took one look at the case and grinned like a poker player with a full house. "You've got them boxed in," she said. "They crossed into criminal territory. And if we subpoena their internal communications and find any mention of coordinated actions against you, that's conspiracy." We did just that. Priya filed a motion for discovery, and within 10 days, we had a court order allowing us access to Oak Shores' internal emails. What we found was a goldmine. Brenda had been sending group messages to the board, referring to me as a threat to property values and insisting they create pressure points to stall my project. One email from Larry reads simply, "I'll take care of the generator issue tonight." Priya built a case like an architect laying bricks. She compiled timelines, overlaid maps, and even interviewed a former Oak Shores board member who had quietly resigned the previous year. His testimony was damning. He confirmed that the board had discussed ways to encourage abandonment of the lot through non-binding enforcement actions. The HOA tried to settle out of court, offered me $25,000 to drop the case and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Priya didn't even reply. We were going to court. At the preliminary hearing, the judge reviewed the footage, the emails, and the arrest report. His expression shifted from neutral to visibly annoyed as the evidence stacked up. "You understand," he said to Brenda's lawyer, "that your client has no legal authority over this man's property, correct?" The lawyer stammered something about shoreline impact zones. The judge shut him down. "This is not a zoning matter. This is a coordinated campaign of harassment and vandalism. And given that your client is a non-governmental organization, I'm inclined to refer this to the DA for further review under criminal conspiracy statutes." Brenda didn't show up to the next HOA meeting. Word spread fast. By the end of the month, 3 board members had resigned, citing personal conflicts. The HOA tried to spin it as a routine leadership change, but no one was buying it. Meanwhile, I kept building. The cabin rose beam by beam, wall by wall. Cassidy stopped by with a bottle of bourbon the day I got the roof sealed. She raised it in a toast. "To neighbors who mind their business." I laughed. "And to HOA boards who forget they're not a government," she nodded. "You know they're still watching you, right?" "I hope so," I said, pointing up to the new weatherproof security camera mounted under the eaves. "Wouldn't want them to miss the grand opening." By the time winter rolled in, the cabin was sealed tight, the wood stove crackling and the lake frozen in a sheet of silver. Peaceful, finally, but I kept the cameras rolling. Just in case someone got nostalgic for the days when they thought they ran the shoreline. Let them come. I had the law, the land, and 100 gigs of footage on my side. The snow came early that year fat, wet flakes that blanketed the pines and softened the edges of everything. I just finished installing the cedar siding and was prepping the interior for insulation when the county sent a letter. Not a fine, not a notice, just a standard envelope with a single page inside. It was from the office of the county assessor. According to the letter, my property had been temporarily reclassified as recreational use with shared community oversight, pending further review. No explanation, no contact name, just a bureaucratic footnote with massive implications. I stared at the words like they were written in fire. Shared community oversight. That reclassification would give the HOA a legal foothold. It would let them argue for regulatory involvement, which meant hearings, delays, and worst of all, precedent. Once that label stuck, it could open the door for every HOA in the county to claim control over properties they didn't own. Cassidy showed up that afternoon with a truckload of reclaimed hardwood. I handed her the letter over a mug of coffee. She read it twice, then set it down with a quiet whistle. "They're playing dirty now," I nodded. "This wasn't the county's idea. Someone pushed this through." She tapped a finger on the edge of the paper. "You've got a name?" "Not yet." "But I've got a plan." I spent that night combing through the county's public records database, looking for any recent zoning adjustments, title changes, or hearing notifications. At 2 in the morning, I found what I was looking for. A memo buried in the meeting minutes of the County Land Use Committee. The memo had been submitted by a Concerned Citizens Environmental Coalition. The group didn't exist 6 months ago. Its registered agent, a man named Douglas Whitmore. Brenda's husband. The next morning, I drove into town and walked straight into the county clerk's office. I signed the request form and waited 20 minutes for the full filing package on the coalition. What I got was a stack of papers showing a fabricated nonprofit with a fake board, a P.O. box at a UPS store, and a mission statement copied nearly word for word from the Oak Shores HOA charter. I scanned the documents and called Priya. "This isn't just harassment," she said after looking through everything. "They created a shell organization to manipulate a zoning classification. That's fraud. And if they coordinated with any county official to get this pushed through without a public hearing, that's criminal conspiracy. We filed a petition with the court to block the reclassification and submitted a complaint to the county ethics board. But Priya didn't stop there. She filed a motion to compel disclosure of all communications between the so-called Environmental Coalition and county employees. What we uncovered next changed everything. A series of emails between Brenda, Douglas, and a junior staffer from the county assessor's office revealed a backroom agreement. The staffer, Ryan Kellerman, had flagged my parcel for environmental review as a favor, under the assumption it would be reverted quietly once I accepted the HOA's terms for compliance. It was extortion by paperwork. Priya forwarded the evidence to the State Attorney General's office. 2 weeks later, investigators from the Department of Public Integrity arrived in town. They interviewed county employees, seized computers, and subpoenaed HOA board meeting transcripts. Ryan Kellerman was arrested for abuse of office. His statement to investigators confirmed that he'd been pressured by Brenda and Douglas to alter the property classification in exchange for a guaranteed promotion. Once Douglas secured a seat on the regional zoning board, Brenda was caught completely off guard. She hadn't expected the state to get involved. The day after the arrest, she sent me a typed letter 1 page, no signature, offering to resolve all disputes amicably through mutual agreement. I didn't respond. Instead, I contacted a local reporter named Elena Voss. She ran a weekly column on municipal corruption and had a reputation for digging deep. I handed her the entire folder: emails, filings, court motions, the arrest record. She raised her eyebrows halfway through. "This is going to rattle some cages." "Good," I said. "Let them know people are paying attention." The article dropped the following Friday. Headline: Fake Nonprofit Real Power Grab, How an HOA Tried to Hijack County Zoning. It went viral in the region. Local TV picked it up, and within days, Oak Shores was the punchline of every HOA joke from here to the state line. But the fallout wasn't just reputational. The State Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into Oak Shores board practices. Subpoenas went out to every current and former board member. Financial records were audited. Several irregularities popped up: mysterious consulting fees, unaccounted beautification grants, and a 6-figure expense labeled Community Relations Initiative that turned out to be a slush fund for legal fights. 3 more arrests followed. Douglas Whitmore was indicted for fraud and conspiracy. 2 board members were charged with misuse of HOA funds. Brenda, she hadn't been charged yet, but she was forced to resign, and the homeowners voted to install an interim board. I kept my head down through the chaos. The cabin was nearly complete. Cassidy helped me with the final floor sanding, and I spent the better part of 1 weekend wiring the sound system. On the first night I slept there, a real storm rolled through, thunder that shook the beams, wind that howled through the pines. I didn't wake once. A month later, I got a call from the new interim HOA president, a man named Calvin Rhymes. He sounded exhausted. "We're cleaning house. We want to make things right." "Appreciate the call, Calvin, but I'm not part of Oak Shores, never have been." "I know. But if you're willing, we'd like you to speak at the next community meeting. About what happened. About what we need to fix." I thought about it for a long second. "I'll come, but I'm not holding back," he laughed, the kind of laugh that carries more weariness than amusement. "That's exactly why we want you." The meeting was held in their old community center, the same one where Larry had been arrested. I stood before the crowd, most of whom I'd never spoken to before. Some looked wary. Others looked tired. All of them looked ready for change. I told them everything. The fake citations, the illegal surveillance, the fraudulent nonprofit, the power games. I showed them the court documents and read a few choice lines from the emails. When I was done, there was silence, heavy, uncomfortable, real. Then someone clapped, then another. And soon the room was echoing with it. I didn't stay for the whole meeting. I said my piece and left. But as I walked out, a woman I didn't know stopped me at the door. She was in her 60s, wore a faded hiking jacket, and had the kind of eyes that had seen too much HOA nonsense for one lifetime. "You fought back," she said. "Most people just give up. I had the time and the receipts." She smiled, not a big smile, just a knowing one. "Well, you made them wish they'd never found your name." Back at the cabin, the lake was still. I pulled a chair onto the deck and watched the moonlight ripple across the water. No lawyers, no threats, no committees, just peace, earned and defended. And across the ridge, behind trees and fences and a fading reputation, Oak Shores was learning what happened when you push the wrong man too far. A week after the community meeting, I got a letter delivered by a uniformed courier, not certified mail, not normal postage. It was from the state auditor's office. I opened it on the porch, coffee in hand, the lake starting to thaw in patches beneath the late spring sun. The letter confirmed that Oak Shores HOA was now under formal state oversight. Their financial records had triggered a full forensic audit, and the county had frozen all HOA discretionary spending accounts until the investigation concluded. The phrase "evidence of systemic financial misconduct" was underlined in bold. I didn't celebrate, not out of modesty, just fatigue. After everything, I wanted to be done, but the wheels were still turning and I wasn't about to step away before seeing where they'd land. 2 days later, Priya called. They found more, she said right away. State investigators uncovered a secondary ledger maintained by the former treasurer. It wasn't just legal fees and bribes, they were laundering money through inflated vendor contracts. I let out a long breath. How much? Over $200,000 in the last 3 years, and one of the vendors? A landscaping company registered to Douglas Whitmore's cousin, no equipment. No employees, just an address tied to a vacant lot. Let me guess. HOA paid them for shoreline erosion control and beautification projects. Exactly. The AG's office is opening a racketeering case. I had to sit down. The bench I built from leftover pine boards creaked as I dropped onto it. From zoning tricks and fake nonprofits to full-blown RICO charges. All because they couldn't stand that someone had a cabin they couldn't control. Priya wasn't done. The sheriff's office reached out. They want a formal statement from you about the generator incident and any other first-hand interactions you had with the board. They're building the timeline. I agreed and scheduled the interview. The next week, I walked into the sheriff's department and sat down with a detective named Halloran. He had a clipboard, a voice like gravel, and a focus that didn't waver once in the 2 hours we spent together. I handed over the trail cam footage, the emails, and a notebook I'd kept during the whole ordeal, dates, names, everything. When I finished, he leaned back and tapped the eraser of his pencil against the desk. You realize this is the most organized HOA corruption case we've ever seen in this region. Didn't set out to make history, I said. Just wanted to build a cabin. By the time I stepped back outside, the sun was high and the wind sharp off the lake. I took the long way home, stopped by the local hardware store and ran into Calvin, the interim HOA president. He looked better than he had at the meeting, less gray in the face, more weight behind his steps. I heard about the audit, I said. He nodded, eyes scanning the shelves like he didn't want to meet mine right away. We're rebuilding everything. The new board voted to dissolve the environmental committee. We're rewriting the bylaws, too. No more blanket authority beyond our actual boundary. I raised an eyebrow. County's going to require us to post physical boundary markers now, he added. Turns out we can't just draw imaginary lines and hope no one notices. Glad someone figured that out. He finally looked at me. You were the wake-up call. Most people just paid their dues and hoped not to get on Brenda's bad side. Now she's got bigger problems. Calvin gave a short laugh. Yeah, fraud, conspiracy, and wire tampering tend to outweigh grass height violations. We parted ways without needing to say more. I went back to the cabin, unloaded supplies, and spent the afternoon installing drawer slides in the kitchen. The kind of quiet task that made you forget the world still had sharp edges. That evening, Cassidy pulled up in her truck, a crate of seedlings in the bed. Thought you might want something green to go with all that cedar and steel, she said, popping the tailgate. We planted together, barefoot in the soft soil, digging little pockets along the edge of the deck. Mountain laurel, creeping thyme, and a few black-eyed Susans, nothing fancy. Just alive. As we worked, she glanced over. You ever think about joining the county zoning board? Me. No thanks. Why not? You already know more about boundaries than half the people in town. I shook my head. I'd rather build things than sit in meetings about them. She let it go, but I could feel her storing the idea away. That was Cassidy. She didn't push, she planted. A month passed. The cabin was done, not just built, finished. I varnished the last stair rail, hung the final light fixture, and took one long walk around the property line with a fresh surveyor's tape just to remind myself where it all began. The state eventually filed formal charges against 5 individuals connected to Oak Shores. Brenda and Douglas were at the top of the list: embezzlement, racketeering, and fraud. The kicker: the judge denied bail for Douglas, citing flight risk and evidence tampering. Brenda was confined to house arrest pending trial, her movements monitored with an ankle bracelet. News vans showed up twice. Once during the arraignment, and again when the state announced plans to introduce legislation requiring HOA financial transparency across all counties. They called it Sandel's Law. I hadn't asked for that, but I wasn't going to fight it. I attended the vote at the state capitol out of curiosity more than anything. Watched as the bill passed unanimously. Met the state senator who introduced it, a wiry woman with a voice sharp enough to cut drywall. "You did more than build a cabin," she told me. "You built a precedent." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and left before the interview started. Back at the lake, the days grew longer. The loons returned. The trail cams came down. I planted a row of saplings along the edge of the driveway, not for privacy, just for peace. One morning in early summer, a letter arrived. Not from a lawyer, not from a government office, just a handwritten envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. It read, "We were wrong. You stood your ground, thank you." No name, no signature, just that. I folded it once and slid it into the back of the drawer where I kept my old building permits. Not for safekeeping, just to remember that even some of the quietest victories leave an echo. The final piece of the story came when the county auctioned off the vacant lot tied to the fake landscaping company. No one wanted it, not until I bid. I bought it for a few thousand. Not because I needed more land, but because I didn't want anyone else using it for anything but honesty. I turned it into a public access fishing spot. One bench, one trash can, one wooden sign that read, "No dues, no rules, just respect." It filled up on weekends. Locals brought their kids, their rods, their cooler chairs. No one asked who owned it. They just used it. That was enough for me. The cabin stood tall, the lake calm, the past buried under the weight of hard truth and harder-earned justice, and Oak Shores. They still held meetings. But now they took minutes. They posted budgets. They stayed inside their lines, exactly where they belonged.